So let me begin this fourth video by emphasizing that Kant's resolution to the third antinomy does not assert that we know that freedom exists, right? We need to be very careful about what it is that Kant is proving in the resolution of the third antinomy. What he's trying to prove here is not that we know that freedom exists. He merely wants to prove that those who deny the existence of freedom don't know what they're talking about. Those who claim that they know that freedom does not exist, in fact, are applying the category of causality beyond the limits of experience in a way that the arguments of the transcendental deduction have shown is illegitimate, right? So the category of cause and effect only legitimately applies within experience. It's a condition of the possibility of experience. We have no reason to assume that it is applicable beyond the limits of experience for purposes of knowledge because it doesn't have any manifold of intuition to synthesize into objects which we could then know and experience. Okay? But it's open to us to use the category of causality in what Kant calls a problematic way. And he doesn't mean it's a problem that we're using it that way, provided that we understand, we're fully conscious of what it is that we're doing. What he means by that is it's like a homework assignment that you never complete, right? So reason assigns to itself the task when you're given a series of causes, right? So you have an event in the world, and then you find its cause, and then you want to know the cause of that cause, and the cause of that cause, and you want to get to the top of that chain, right? Kant wants to say, okay, that's a completely legitimate process. It's just that it's very easy to cross over from this boundary between experience and what lies beyond experience in the process of going up that chain, right? So what we have in that search for the ultimate cause of any event, what we have there is we have a process that goes in this upward direction toward the ultimate cause. And you notice my thumb went outside the frame of the picture, outside of your screen. And what happened there is at a certain point, we rose beyond the limits of experience, right? The fact that we go in that direction is not an issue, right? Reason forces us to go in that direction. But we have to realize that at this point, right, precisely at this point, reason has given us a homework assignment, a problem that we can't complete, a problem that we can't solve, right? So then we apply the concept of cause problematically beyond the limits of experience to a God, a free human will, something like that, right? Again, not in a way that would give us knowledge, because knowledge requires us to synthesize an object out of a manifold of intuition, and our manifold of intuition ends right there, right? But we can think about a cause of all of our experience that lies outside of our experience, okay? But since we can't know it, since it's not fully legitimate for purposes of knowledge, to project, to use that cause and effect beyond the limits of experience, why would we want to do it, right? Well, morality and religion would go out of the window if we don't do it, right? But who's to say that morality and religion should not go out the window, right? A militant atheist like Richard Dawkins would say, we should, in fact, let morality and religion go out the window because it's inconsistent with the modern scientific worldview. It's inconsistent with what we know. In fact, it contradicts what we know. Well, Dawkins hasn't read Kant very closely, but someone like Freud, right, presumably also wants to say that religion and morality are a kind of sickness that we get infected with in our youth that something like psychotherapy or just clear thinking could cure us of. Kant wants to go in a very different direction. He thinks we have to go in a very different direction. And the reason for that, you can find starting on page 540 of the reading for today. And these arguments and these concepts will be familiar to those of you who've studied Kant's Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals in your Ethics and Justice class. And I hope that's close to 100% of you. So what Kant tries to show there is that we all do always already have some kind of moral consciousness, right? And the moral consciousness is this idea in our minds that really just comes from rationality, right? So the two constitutive features of rationality, the two things that makes reason rational, are universality and necessity, right? So we can say that we know something in science if we've discovered a principle that is universal and necessary, like the principle of universal gravitation that Isaac Newton discovers, like later the principle of relativity that Einstein discovers, the principles of quantum physics, even the principle of indeterminism that's discovered later on. These are all thought of as universal and necessary principles. If they were contingent principles, if they only applied within a certain region of reality, we wouldn't say that we've really known something by means of those principles. So the idea of morality for Kant, what that idea arises from, is simply the idea of universality and necessity applied not to knowledge, not to our theoretical reason, but to our practical reason. What we have in our minds when we ask ourselves, what would be the rational next thing to do? We're not just thinking, what would be the rational next thing to do in order to satisfy, let's say, our desire for pleasure as utilitarians or Epicureans or hedonists, which are really all the same thing by three different names. That's what they want to act out of, right? But Kant says we all have within us this idea that we should act as rational beings. And the way that a rational being acts is not just for self-preservation. The way that a rational being acts is in a way that she could accept every other rational being in the universe also acting. That's the categorical imperative, right? Act always in such a way that the maxim or the rule that you're using in your action could be made into a universal law for all rational beings. And according to Kant, we all have this in our minds, right? It comes simply from these two constitutive features of rationality, universality and necessity, applied not to knowing, as they are in science, but to action. Okay, so we all have this. This is the principle of moral obligation for us. We have it simply because we are rational. Okay, so what's the relationship between that and freedom? Well, the categorical imperative, the first word of the categorical imperative is act, right? In other words, the categorical imperative, that highest principle of morality, it calls upon us to act. It obligates us to act. It says that we have a duty to act in a certain way, right? Now, think about the logic of asking someone to act, right? Your parents, around the time you're 3 or 4 years old, they start saying some version of behave, right? When you're doing something they don't want you to do. Either something that annoys them or something that could hurt you or someone else, right? They say, behave, don't do that, do this other thing, right? Be careful, don't run out into the street and so forth. These are not moral issues, right? Not first and foremost. They're really prudential issues. do this and you'll be happy, or don't do that because it threatens your existence or well-being or something like that. But even in cases like that, you don't have to go to the moral case. Even in cases like that, Kant wants to say, look, the moral law says act, or even just the prudential law, the instrumental law, the law of hedonism says act. That presupposes that you are capable of making a choice, right? And it doesn't make any sense to say that you're capable of making a choice if we are simply stimulus and response mechanisms. And certainly at the very latest, when you say, don't do that because it's wrong, right? As soon as we do that, we predicate that we do have freedom. Now, we don't know that we have freedom, but Kant, for practical purposes, for purposes of action, Kant wants to say we are the kinds of beings who must posit ourselves and others as intelligible beings, so that we're forced by the idea of moral obligation, not by science, right? Kant wants to admit that science doesn't really have anything to do with morality, right? But from the perspective of ethics, our own consciousness of the moral law requires us to think of ourselves as existing in an intelligible world, a world of things in themselves, and existing there as free beings who are capable of making choices, and choices that are not only effective, that hold not only for the world of things in themselves, but that end up in the world of appearances. Because when we say act, we mean not only make a free choice to do this thing, we're also saying do it, right? Treat other persons with respect is one of the entailments of the categorical imperative. Well, we can't do that unless we are acting toward other persons in the empirical world. And that, of course, does entail thinking of other persons and not simply of ourselves. Thinking of ourselves as we experience ourselves in the empirical world. Thinking of others as they appear to us in the world of our experience, as free beings who give themselves the moral law, and that's what gives us the dignity, so that it's not right for us to treat ourselves merely as things, and it's not right for us to treat other rational beings merely as things.